Let me share my screen.
Yes, we can hear you. And
how is that for a screen share?
Yes, we can see your screen. And now we can see your slideshow. Excellent. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, let me just. Okay. Hopefully that'll work. Hi, everyone. I am Lisa Schibley. I'm a birder. Let me start with, I've been a birder since 1993. So my spark bird was a Verdin. I started birding in Tucson, Arizona. I don't really have enough time to tell that story, but it's a good one. But maybe we can save it to the end. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the International Shorebird Survey. The International Shorebird Survey has been around since the early 70s. Brian Harrington was a young shorebird scientist just starting at Manomet, and he was thinking about not the shorebirds that we see that are the breeding shorebirds, not the piping plover and the American oyster catcher, that a lot of shorebird scientists were studying at that time. He was interested in the shorebirds that were migratory. So they spend their winter, the summer very far north in the Arctic. They breed in the tundra or the northern boreal areas. And they travel through our spaces and they travel south. So they might be Central America or the Caribbean. And some of them go as far south as the southern tip of South America. These are some of the world's most, the strongest migrants of the bird world. And he was interested in understanding the biology of this migration. Where do the shorebirds stop? What do they need? How many of them are there? How do they know where to go? But his problem was that he didn't really have an easy way to get up to the Arctic or get down to South America to look at where these birds are, where they spend most of the time. He needed to figure out how to study them while they were on the move. And he knew that the Christmas bird count and the breeding bird survey had been going on for a while and had been producing really good results. And he wanted to apply that idea of having an army of shorebird enthusiasts across the hemisphere to send him shorebird information and collect that and use that to understand what's going on with shorebirds. So in 1974, he actually put an announcement in American Birds, which was a journal of the time that collected bird information and records and shared that throughout the United States. And he said that anybody who was interested in sending me data on shorebirds, send it to Brian Harrington at his address, or also from Canada, he worked with Guy Morrison to set up a similar program in Canada. And so Brian Harrington received hundreds of these handwritten sheets, and it became thousands eventually, of shorebird enthusiasts across the hemisphere who sent him counts of shorebirds at their local patches. The first year, he actually received like almost 100 records. And by 1980, he was receiving in the thousands. So you can see on the map, this is spaces across the sites across the Western Hemisphere where we have received shorebird data. And in 2006, we changed from those paper records to eBird to make the collection of the data much easier. And then we hit 200,000 surveys in 2024. And in 2023, we had more than 750 contributors submitting 11,000 checklists from more than 1,300 sites across the Western Hemisphere. I kind of jumped a little bit ahead of the game because I wanted to introduce what the International Shorebird Survey was. But we have to make sure that we're talking about the same thing when we say shorebirds. Shorebirds are a diverse group of birds that they're the sandpipers, the plovers, the oyster catchers, the phalaropes. They're birds of the shore, but not just birds of the shore. They're also of the grasslands and open places. There are shorebirds are one of the unique families for many reasons. And this is some basic characteristic of what makes a shorebird. They generally have long bills to help find food in mud and water, an upright stance, long toes and long legs to help them get through the muck. Mottled plumage, they're not our most crazily colored bird. And a lot of them have long wings because they're, as I said, they're great migrants. And so there's so many things that are unique about shorebirds. And each one of these little tidbits here, a shorebird scientist could actually do, a whole presentation about each one. And so I'm just going to touch on them just to show you how unique shorebirds are. Shorebirds migrant, as I mentioned. So there was a barred-tailed godwit that set a world migration record for 11 days and traveled 11 days nonstop. So, when we talk about migrants, we also talk about, Arctic terns. They go from the Arctic to the Antarctic. The thing is about an Arctic tern is if it needs to rest, it can sit on the water or it can fish and try to get a fish. And it even glides. It can glide some. And a shorebird can't do any of that. Once they start going, they have to keep flying nonstop, and there's no alternative. If they can't fly, they can't make it. And related to that, they have this incredible ability to put on so much mass, so much fat to use up on their journey. So often shorebirds, if you see them in the fall, they're very pudgy, and that's because they've doubled their body weight. That's an amazing thing. Shorebirds have this mesmerizing movement. You can see a flock of shorebirds on the ocean when a peregrine comes by and does these amazing aerodynamic moves. And that's something that I could just sit and watch that for hours. They have elaborate courtship displays. I know we've all are familiar with the woodcock, and you can imagine what the Arctic must be like with quite a number of species, each having their unique display. The spiraling and the noise, and it's a something that makes the shorebirds even more dynamic. They have the distraction displays, and those are the killdeer pretending to have a broken wing. And I'd only learned this a few years ago. I didn't know this, but the shorebirds, they have this ability, if they have a long bill like the godwits, they can actually move the tip of their bill in the sand and in the shore, in the sand to help them catch their prey. And I've always thought that was really cool. And even things on this list, like the fact that the phalaropes, the female phalaropes are the bright ones, and the male phalaropes are the ones that are more camouflaged for the nets. That's fairly unique in the shorebird world. So there's a reason why the people who love shorebirds, they really love shorebirds. shorebird enthusiasts are passionate about these birds because they really are unique. But of course, you can't, the most unique thing about it is that the baby shorebirds are actually the cutest of all of the babies in the shorebird world. So that's just not up for debate. So who is Manomet conservation scientists? So we already know that shorebirds are, the coolest birds. So that's why scientists at Manomet Conservation Sciences study them. But what is this organization? So Manomet started as a banding operation, a land bird banding operation in the late 60s. And they have had their banding operation going as without any changes, the same 50 nets in the same exact area for more than 50 years now. So it's one of the richest data sets in North America in terms of finding information about population changes and climate change and what's going on with the land birds. And then from that beginning, the Manomet spread out, started working with shorebirds. We have fisheries, a very strong fishery program in Maine. We're starting to work with partners in habitat management, specifically in Central and South America, working with industries for working land and seas. We have climate sciences that touch all of these biologies, and then a lot of education. So not just education with the banding lab, like, school groups are coming almost every day throughout spring and fall, which is when they have the banding. But also we work with kids in Brockton, and we are part of the Massachusetts Young Birders Club. So there's a lot going on at Manomet, and I certainly invite you to take a look at the manomet.org website and sign up for the newsletter, because you will always find different information going on. So I did want to say a little bit about two key parts of Manomet's work. Manomet has been sending scientists to the Arctic since 2001, and we send our scientists up there so that we could understand what's going on with threats to shorebirds, what is climate change doing to affect those populations, how do shorebirds use the habitat, what are the limiting factors to successful breeding. And some of the things that we've been doing is putting satellite tags on shorebirds up there, and so we can map their migration paths that way. And something cool that I'm not actually part of that project, but I think it's so cool that I love talking about it. Putting out 120 audio recording devices across an area in the Arctic to understand again what's happening to shorebird populations up there, who's there, and what's going on with them. So lots of really interesting science to be gleaned from the work that our shorebird scientists do up there. And then the other half of our staff, so Manomet has staff across the hemisphere. Even though we're headquartered in Massachusetts, we have staff throughout Central and South America. The folks in Central and South America are also working on shorebird questions, shorebird threats. And a lot of what they do down there are partnered with resource industries. So shrimp farms and cattle ranches and salt producers, they're all industries that use the same space that shorebirds need. And we have found that they are interested in shorebird conservation as well. And we've had many successful partnerships with identifying what practices are affecting the shorebirds and working together to figure out, is there anything that we can do to be helpful to what the shorebirds need? We also do a lot of wide range surveys for endemics, for some of the endemics that aren't very well known, for example, the Magellanic plover. And recently we've finished up a first of its kind Amazon River Basin shorebird survey. It only recently we've been realizing that the Amazon Basin is a very important geography for shorebirds. We've known in South America that the mangrove coasts along northern South America and also the ocean down along the Argentina and Chile was important. And we knew the pampas was important for the grassland birds like the buff-breasted sandpiper. What we didn't realize until recently is that the Amazon basin, as the water rises and falls, it creates these extensive flats. And those are important areas for shorebirds. So that's something that we've been part of that discovery and understanding. And then this is just more local information. Like I just put this slide together today because this was all in the Manomet newsletter today. And when it popped in, I said, okay, I'm going through the presentation. I really want to make sure folks understand who Manomet is and what we do. And the newsletter popped up and I said, oh, look at all those great stuff. I'm putting that in my slide. And so we have Zoom talks about shorebirds, but we also do bird walks, and we're doing a wings and watercolor paint night to make sure that folks, get to know Manomet and help make that connection to help the nature inspire conservation. So that is my basic summary of what is up with Manomet. So where does ISS fit in? So I particularly work on ISS, which is the International Shorebird Survey. And one of the things that you might have heard of that's part of the ISS is 3 billion birds gone, 3 billion birds project. So this is a paper that came out in 2019. And in 2019, it was the biggest science story in the news. It was, front page of the New York Times. It was on most of the television news shows. It was the most shared news story, most shared science news story of the year. And 3 billion birds basically was a paper that said, based on Christmas bird count and breeding bird survey data, there are 3 billion birds less in the world than there was, say, 40 years ago. I think it was 40 years. And the Christmas bird count and the breeding bird survey, as I mentioned, it's a lot of very strong data that's been happening for decades. But those two counts don't count migrating shorebirds. There really aren't any breeding bird lines way up north in the Arctic, and there are very few CBC circles in the very isolated places where these shorebirds spend in Central and South America. And so when we were talking to Ken Rosenberg was the lead scientist of this paper, and it was written with Manomet scientists. But when we were talking to Ken about where did ISS fit in, because we knew that they used our data, he said, if it weren't for ISS, we would not have enough data on these 20 shorebirds to include them in the analysis. So I love that quote, and I put it up on every presentation that I do. I share it because I want to make sure that if I'm talking to folks who contribute to ISS, I want them to know your data went into, one of the most important bird science articles, of the last 10 years. So after the 2019 paper came out, after 3 billion birds, Paul Smith, which was one of the lead authors of that paper, decided to drill down more into the shorebird data. And there's a lot of information on this slide. I'm not going to talk about too much of it, but the basic point is between 1980 and 2019, 26 out of 28 shorebird species were found to be declining. And this table basically shows what the summary is. If you think about this table as the middle of the table, oops, sorry, the middle of the table, I'm gesturing, the middle of the table being no increase or decrease. Everything to the left of the center line is a decrease. So starting at the top, we do have 2 species that actually have increased over the last 2 years, 40 years, the willet and the marbled godwit. But unfortunately, everything else is left of the center line. And when you get down to the bottom, when you get down to the red knot, Hudsonian godwit, short-billed dowitcher, we're talking about like a 90% decrease in population. So all of this analysis is done completely with ISS data. Excuse me. I'm going to take another sip of water. But I can't show this slide without going to this slide. So in 2001, Manomet started as it was one of the partners in, but led the initiation of the American Oystercatcher Working Group, because they recognized that oystercatchers' population trends were just going down very quickly. And they studied what was going on. They were able to get funding. They focused research to identify threats. Excuse me. They did what they came up with was to reduce disturbances and manage predation and restore habitat. Because of that, they had a 45 increase in population in 15 years. I'm going to go on mute just for a second. Okay, sorry, I just had a cough and I didn't want you guys to have to worry about it. Okay, so the American oystercatcher shows that with funding, unfortunately, funding is important, but using the science to do the actions that we know will help, we can get the populations back. And this species proves that even though the previous slide was very depressing, there is hope. Okay, so back to ISS. ISS, it is a participatory science endeavor. So we are looking for mostly volunteers. We do have some state biologists and partner biologists who also incorporate ISS to their work, but most of the data that comes in from ISS are just birders and shorebird enthusiasts and nature enthusiasts that go to places where shorebirds are and they send us data. And we're going to talk about the how about later. But right now we're going to talk a little bit about ISS in New England. So this is a slide that I actually put together when I was doing a presentation for all of New England. And you can see the coast of New England has been covered. This is all of the sites that have been covered by ISS since the very beginning. So there's lots of them. None of these sites have been covered every year since ISS started. This is just shows all of the sites that have ever been covered. And on the left is a list of some of the sites that have been most frequently covered. And the reason I wanted to show this slide is because if you look right in the middle of it, you've got Long Meadow Flats. And Long Meadow Flats is one of the sites that is, I think, important to the Allen Bird Club. And so that's why I wanted to show this slide, because you are a very important part of ISS and shorebirds. So this is a map that shows all of the sites. I kind of zoomed in on the Springfield area and the Connecticut River Valley area. And so there are 5 sites. There are lots of sites that have had some ISS. There's 5 sites that have had repeated ISS. And I have the names and the years and the contributors. And some of the highlights are actually quite impressive. You know, Long Meadow Flats. And I have to admit, I've never been to Long Meadow Flats, and I would very much like to change that, because it's amazing when some of the numbers that I was looking at. But still, Sandpiper and Ruddy Turnstone. And I apologize for using the symbols, the abbreviations for the shorebirds, but I wanted to get a lot into a small area. But BBSA is buff-breasted sandpiper, and BASA is Baird's sandpiper. So these are really good species that are showing up in multiple places in the Connecticut River Valley. And so we are definitely looking to get some of these sites covered. And I know you can look at the years and say, oh, but this was all in the past, and I don't know if there's still, you know, sites that we should cover now. But this is, I'm going to call out my friend Noah. This is a eBird checklist from just a few years ago. And this is an ISS checklist. So Noah submitted this to ISS, and I'm sharing this with his permission. And you know, this is a great shorebird checklist. With stilt sandpiper is a great species, and yellowlegs, and a nice flock of leaf sandpiper. And this was 2021. So these species, this site is a site that I'd love to get covered for ISS, because oh, I think I added another slide and I think it didn't go. I was going to show, actually it's a little bit later. I was going to show that if you look at, this map is 2024. I don't have a single ISS survey from the central area of Massachusetts. So I did this a little bit backwards. Join us. I'm hoping that the takeaway from my presentation is that we would love to have someone submit some ISS data from several areas in your region. So the very next question is, well, how do we do that? The first thing that you think about if you decide you want to help with ISS is, well, where would you submit checklists from? The answer to that is one, somewhere that has shorebirds. It doesn't have to have a ton of shorebirds. It doesn't have to be Long Meadow. It just has to have some shorebirds. We're more interested in you picking a place that you go to regularly. You go there normally to bird throughout the season. We don't recruit folks to cover a site that's, say, an hour away from them, that they don't go to regularly, because that makes too much of a burden. We want somewhere that you just go, even if there's just a few shorebirds. As long as they're shorebirds, those numbers are valuable to us. There's a URI graduate student named Rebecca Linhart that just submitted a paper that is described how a large group of sites that host shorebirds is just as important as one site that hosts a lot of shorebirds if you aggregate them up. So we always say you don't have to go to the one site that has all of the shorebirds. We're looking for sites that have any shorebirds. And so if you want to kind of take a look at which sites were on the map that had some shorebirds in your area, this is the webpage that you go to. So it's on manomet.org. And if you type in, to Google International Shorebird Survey Mapping Tool, this is what comes up. And you can also use the QR code to get there. If you select on United States, Massachusetts, show the map, you'll see these little place marks. And then you can, sorry, I went too far forward. And then you can click through and you can see what year was covered, what species were seen there. And if they're not currently covered, which in your area, none are, you can submit data. So the way that you submit data is through eBird. It is super easy. When you get to your site, there's a few things that is important. We ask you to cover the site in the same way each time. So that means if you always cover it by doing a loop, and that's your site, we ask that you always do that same loop. If it usually takes you an hour to cover it, then try to do it an hour each time. A little bit more, a little bit less is fine. You record all that information in eBird. But consistency is what's important to us, so that you cover the same site in the same way. 3 times per migration season is at least what we're looking for. More is fine, but 3 times, so say, and again, these are migratory shorebirds, so we're mostly interested in the ones that are passing through. So let's say March, April, May, once a month for 3 months. That's great. More is better, but 3 is the minimum. And then in the fall, it can be August, September, October. And we want you to count all of the shorebirds at the site. That's the most important thing. We know shorebirds can be tricky. Sometimes you can go birding and you can say, oh, I'm going to count everything. And then you get to the shorebirds and you say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go look somewhere else. Because shorebirds can be tricky. For the ISS, the key is that we ask that you count all of the shorebirds. And we have an estimation webinar on Manomet's YouTube page. You can be conservative about identification if you're not sure which dowitcher it is. Dowitcher SPA is fine. We're mostly interested in, overall numbers. And then if you want to submit your data, you have to do it through the eBird app. After you stop, there's a drop-down list for survey type. That's where you select ISS. So I'm going to hop over here. You can see it down at the bottom under you choose observation type. So instead of traveling, stationary, incidental, you just select on ISS. After you've counted all of your surveys, submit that, and that goes into the ISS database. I'm going to skip this one. And if you do become an ISS contributor, you'll get our newsletter. We love to give shorebird identification tips, and we talk about various very important shorebird sites, and we love to celebrate our contributors. So we'll tell stories about someone, maybe someone who's been doing ISS for a long time, maybe someone who's new, but we always have a lot of fun telling stories about our contributors because we love our contributors. And we also encourage folks to do flag shorebirds. So we try to share information about how to submit flags. We always try to have some informational chunk in the newsletter to make it interesting and helpful. If we have swag, we have stickers. Anybody who does a survey gets a sticker. I send stickers to anybody asks, and if I'm like, I'll be at the birders meeting next Saturday and I'll have stickers. If anybody comes up to me and says, I do ISS, I'll give them a sticker. We try to make this a lot of fun because we really appreciate our contributors. And that is it. I am very grateful to have the opportunity to talk about shorebirds and ISS to y'all. And I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Lisa.
Should I stop sharing my screen, or should I keep it up in case anybody wants to refer to an image?
That sounds like a good idea to keep it up. And thank you for a wonderful presentation.
You're very kind.
Yeah. Well, what a collaborative effort. What a huge collaboration. So we do have some questions in the chat, and I'm going to hand that over to our moderator and let her ask them.
Okay. Hi, Lisa. Thank you very much for this presentation. The first question is from Janice, and she wants to know, are the numbers for the short-billed dowitchers declining significantly in Massachusetts in particular?
I think Massachusetts matches about, I can go back to that slide. I don't know, I've always had two minds about whether, there it is. So the short-billed dowitcher is one of the biggest drops, and down in the 85% range. And I know that the numbers in Massachusetts have dropped similar to that. I don't know if it's exactly that, more or less, but I know it's significant.
Okay. All right. The next question is from Michelle, and she's asking, would you like reports from previous years that were originally reported in eBird?
Yes, absolutely. The key is continuity. And this is something that Brian Harrington was so brilliant when he set this up, because he understood birders. Like, he understood that birders have their favorite patch. You know, they like going out and seeing what's changing and anticipating that newest arrival in the spring, or excited when the juvies show up in the fall. And he knows that birders, and not just birders, but nature watchers, you know, folks who are interested in the natural world, like understanding the rhythms. And so watch through the seasons to see the changes, and noticing that, oh, this is when the shorebirds arrive. Oh, look, this is when there's the most shorebirds. This is when they leave. It wouldn't be that hard for birders to just write those numbers down and then send them to him. And so he designed the whole ISS about that repeatability. So if you've only visited a site one time, even though it had a lot of shorebirds there, that data isn't that helpful to ISS. But if you happen to go to a spot that has shorebirds and you visit it about the same way each time, like, to use an example, my local patch with shorebirds is Plymouth Beach, and I only live like 10 minutes away from Plymouth Beach. I'm very lucky. But sometimes I go and I just go to the first turnaround and I look and I'm focused on something else. I'm not doing ISS and I'll just look at the first area where there are shorebirds, and also I'm interested in maybe the ducks, or maybe there's an interesting gull or something like that. And I won't get to the second area where there are shorebirds. I wouldn't tag that as ISS. So if sometimes you visit a site and you go partly and sometimes you don't, I wouldn't tag all of those ISS. But if you always visit a site the same way and there are shorebirds, and sometimes there are shorebirds, sometimes there are not shorebirds, but that historic data would actually be very helpful to ISS. That would be amazing to have any historic information about where shorebirds are, when they use the site, things like that. In fact, if anybody is thinking about a couple of different possible sites and they go on that ISS map that I had up and they notice that one is historically covered but the other wasn't, we'd love to get data, new data from the one that was historically covered. That would be amazing too.
Okay. All right, next question is from Jennifer, and she would like to know, what is a flagged shorebird?
Oh, let's go to that slide. I love talking about flagged shorebirds. They're so much fun. Okay, so before all of this newfangled technology where you actually can put a little satellite transmitter on the back of a shorebird and watch it fly along in almost real time, which is amazing. But before that, the only way that scientists figured out how to figure out where birds are going is by putting these little metal flags on their legs. So you can see down at the bottom, there's a photo by Sam Zhang of a sanderling that has a little flag on his leg that says CCL. And if you see one of those, it's like winning the lottery. I usually find maybe 3 or 4 or 5 a year, so it's not that rare. But it's really cool because once you get that code, you can put it into this database called bandedbirds.org, and I think I have the website on there somewhere. Maybe I don't. I should. Bandedbirds.org, and you type green CCL, and it'll tell you where that bird was banded. Like the last one I did, it was banded in New Jersey. And it'll also tell you if anybody else somewhere along its lifetime has found it and reported it. So I put in a bird last year, a sanderling, and I had found it 5 years ago, the same exact bird, except I forgot that I did. So it was amazing to see it pop up. It's like, oh, I saw that bird 5 years ago. And you see them, sometimes you see them in Canada, and you see that they spent time in Florida, and it's a lot of really cool. It's one of the only other birds that often have readable infield flags are gulls. So if you find a gull that has a leg band that you can read the number, you can do the same thing. But shorebirds a lot of people ban shorebirds, so it's very exciting to see it.
Okay. The next question is from Andrea, and she asks, oh, where'd it go? Have there been any conservation initiatives born directly from data collected by the ISS?
So that's a really great question. So one of the most important conservation initiatives that has come out of ISS is WISRN, which is the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. And this is a Manomet-led hemispheric effort to identify the most important sites for shorebirds and find out who manages those spaces. So for example, there are 2 WISRN sites in Massachusetts. There's Manomet and there's Parker River Wildlife National Refuge. And so when those two sites were identified as important to shorebirds based on ISS data, Manomet and other partners kind of outreach to the refuge managers and said, your sites are hemispheric level important sites for shorebirds. Would you take into account shorebirds in your management practices? And if the owners of the site agree to do that, they're part of the WISR network. And there's not a lot of like enforcement. Like there's nothing Manomet or some of the other nonprofits can do to force action, but it's being part of the this shorebird network, and knowing that there are other sites out there that are important, and you can exchange information and exchange science and learn lessons and understand what works at one site and maybe apply it. Being part of the network it's helpful, and it has increased the awareness of the importance of shorebirds at that site, and partners have implemented shorebird conservation practices because they're part of the WISR network. And a lot of sites are part of the WISR network because of data that came out of the International Shorebird Survey. Did that answer the question?
Okay. So James would like to know, do you want 1 or 2 dedicated surveyors or anyone who is out birding?
So we have bird clubs that do ISS together, and it doesn't have to be like just one person. There's the Nascatasket Bird Club. I hate saying that name. I always say it wrong. That's down, they bird along the south coast of Massachusetts. So New Bedford area, Fall River, Allen's Pond, all that area in there. And they have a site that they've adopted. And it's not always the same person that goes and counts the shorebirds at that site. It's always someone of that bird club. And it's often the same person, but not always. So a group of people could adopt a site, and that's fine. As long as there's communication, and they always cover the site the same way, and they always like, y'all won't have title sites, so this is not important for you, but anybody who might do ISS with that bird club knows always do it at high tide. This is a high tide site. If you go there at low tide, there won't be any shorebirds. And if you count no shorebirds and you put that into the database, that's like that's not a correct data point. So the most important thing to remember is that we want a site covered in the same way, consistently. So it doesn't really matter to us whether it's one person or 2 people or a small group covering that site, as long as they all cover it the same way. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, so here's a question from Michelle. And she says, at the Longmeadow Flats, depending on the amount of rain and level of the Connecticut River, shorebirds can be either on the sandbar near the Longmeadow Island in the river or in the agricultural fields right inland from there. Would this be considered the same patch or 2 different patches? Or how would you prefer this to be reported year to year, or even month to month during the same year?
So it should be considered one patch, because some days the same group of shorebirds might be in the agriculture areas, and someday they might be on the sandbar, if I'm understanding correctly. And I think I do. I've heard about how it works. And it's really could be the same group of shorebirds. There's not one group of shorebirds that only uses the agricultural field and one group of shorebirds that only use the mudflats, right? They move back and forth. Is that correct?
If Michelle wants to answer that question, if she turns on her
Yep.
microphone.
Yes. Yes, that is correct. And it's just that the water levels can really vary year to year, and where the shorebirds go is very dependent on if the river is high, there's no sandbar, but the fields are usually flooded, and that's where the shorebirds go. But each year the dynamics can be really different. But you're right, the same shorebirds would either, if the sandbar is available,
Yep.
go there, or they would go into the fields if that isn't available, or if they get chased out of there by a peregrine.
So is it possible to cover both sites
Yes.
in one visit?
Yes, absolutely.
So I would definitely consider both as one ISS site to be covered on one visit.
Great.
The idea is that the birders that I talk to, they know their sites. They know, you know, that the shorebirds sometimes use it then and sometimes use it here, and we want you to think of not necessarily the site, but a group of shorebirds. Wherever they end up in the geography that you're thinking about, whatever the group of shorebirds is doing, we want you to count that group of shorebirds. And if that means that you have to kind of check both areas, even though it's a pain in the neck to do ISS, that's what we would ask for. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. I just want to make sure because the Long Meadow Flats are 10 minutes from where I live, and that's an area I go to frequently. And if I'm covering it, I just want to make sure I cover it correctly.
That would be amazing to get that covered, because there's some really fun checklists from there over the past few years. And like I said, since NOAA, excuse me, since NOAA, we haven't had any coverage, so that'd be great to get some data from there.
Great. Well, I will definitely put that on my list. Oh, my pleasure.
Okay.
Sorry about this. Little tickle.
Okay, this is from Tom and Robbie, and it says, I'm sure it is too early to tell, but all federal parks have seen huge firings in talented rangers. How do we try and cover those areas?
It's so sad. It's so hard. I know people that have, I don't know anybody who's lost their job, but I know people who know people who have lost their job. And they're people in some of the most important shorebird service spaces in all of the United States. And I'm not sure what the best way is to support them if you know we don't have access to a shorebird site because they've closed a national park because they don't have staffing. There's not much we can do about that. But if we still have access, the point is we always want to count in the same way each time we visit. So hopefully the access to like Manomet and to Parker River won't change, and we'll still be able to count those spaces. And I'm not sure if the shorebird sites that I'm aware of in your part of Massachusetts, if any of those are affected by possible federal closures. Because I know that there's some sites in Alaska that are going to be closed because there's no one to, you know, help manage the people and the wildlife up there. And some of those are shorebird sites. So I'm not sure how that's going to fall out yet. It's all a big unknown at this point.
Okay. So that was the last question, unless anybody else wants to put one in. That was it.
Lisa, that was wonderful information. And it sounds like you might have some more
Great.
participants.
That would be so awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was wonderful having you, Allen Bird Club. Be well, bird often, and we'll see you next month. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.